Section 43 of the Treasure Chest of My Bookhouse. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Treasure Chest of My Bookhouse, edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. Young Midshipman David Farragut. When the War of 1812 broke out, wherein the United States found herself compelled to establish by force of arms her freedom on the seas, the frigate Essex, 146 feet long, 32 short-range guns, was placed under the command of Captain David Porter. He came aboard bringing with him as midshipman his little adopted son, David Farragut, who was one day to be known as America's greatest admiral. David had received his first appointment as midshipman in the United States Navy at the mature age of 9, and he was now at the time of entering on his duties aboard the Essex exactly 10. Scarcely had the Essex put to sea when adventures began. Captain Porter captured from the midst of a whole convoy of British transports a merchantman with 200 men, and soon after a British man of war, the sloop Alert, of 20 guns. The two ships were taken in tow, but their officers and a number of the men were ordered as prisoners aboard the Essex. Thus the Essex soon became dangerously overcrowded, her prisoners far outnumbering the members of the crew. Among the prisoners a conspiracy was hatched to fall unexpectedly on the Americans, either kill or overpower them, and so capture the frigate. On the night when the mutiny was to break out, little Midshipman Farragut lay awake in his hammock. Suddenly he saw a man looming up above him and covering him with his pistol. For a moment the man gazed intently at him to make certain he was asleep, ready to shoot without mercy at a sign of the smallest movement. The boy never budged, but through half open lids he saw that the sailor was one of the British prisoners, and with remarkable keenness of wit he guessed what was afoot on the vessel. When the Englishman, satisfied that he was asleep, stole away, David slipped noiselessly out of his hammock and made straight off to Captain Porter, dodging well out of sight of the gathering mutineers. The captain was asleep in his cabin when the boy broke into the room, but at first news of the mutiny he was instantly on his feet. Perceiving in a flash the only way to save the ship, Porter rushed, half dressed as he was, onto the deck, shouting, "Fire! Fire! Fire!" The effect was wonderful. The mutineers were at once confused and alarmed, fear of fire at sea driving all thoughts of mutiny out of their heads, while the American crew, remarkably well disciplined in fire drill, came tumbling up on deck and rushed each to his station with a cutlass in one hand and a blanket in the other. This sudden and unexpected appearance of the crew in perfect fighting array finished the demoralization of the mutineers. At Captain Porter's orders they were every one seized and secured. Thus by his coolness and keenness of wit, little Midshipman Farragut's first adventure at sea was to save a ship to the American Navy. The next required a still greater display of manliness and courage. Late in the winter of 1812 the Essex was ordered on a cruise through the South Atlantic, around Cape Horn, and into the Pacific, there to attack the extensive fishing interest of Great Britain, to rescue any American boats, and to set free captured American whalers. The proper season for rounding Cape Horn had long since passed, and the course of the Essex would lie through a region exceedingly tempestuous in winter. Moreover, the ports along the coast were all friendly to England, and the Essex could not hope to refit or revictual in any of their harbors. She would have to depend solely on her own resources. Undaunted by the perils that lay before them, Captain Porter and his crew, little David Farragut among them, set out upon the distant cruise in the last days of January, 1813. As the Essex neared the Horn the most violent storms broke over her, lifting the waves into raging mountains of water, and hurling them against the frail little boat with gigantic force. But in spite of all the dangers and hardships she kept resolutely on. At length she sighted the rocky, barren shore line of the Galapagos Islands, off the coast of Ecuador, which Porter had learned were the favorite rendezvous for the British whalers. Here they cruised about in a leisurely fashion, little David and other members of the crew frequently going ashore to fish, hunt the huge tortoises for which the place was famous, or to pick the luscious Galapagos pears. But as the British whalers appeared in these waters they captured them all successfully, till at last every single one had fallen a victim to the Essex, and numerous American prisoners had been freed from the hands of the enemy. Captain Porter then found himself with 9 vessels under him, and such a number of prisoners that he was obliged to put back to the mainland of Ecuador, and make preparations to send the prize ships he had taken back for safe keeping to the harbor of Valparaiso, Chile, one of the few South American ports that was friendly to the United States. One of these prizes, which had been turned into a United States cruiser and christened the Essex Junior, he detailed as escort to the convoy on the return. He then ordered each of his officers as prize master to command one of the captured vessels, but not having officers enough to go around, he found himself forced to select someone among the crew to command the American ship Barclay, which he had recaptured from the enemy. His choice for this responsible task fell on Midshipman Farragut. With a party of seamen under him, the boy was sent aboard, having orders to manage the Barclay on her long voyage to Chile. Imagine it, at the age of 12, in command of a vessel. It was a tremendously important event, and the boy was rightfully proud of the confidence reposed in him. The captain of the Barclay, who had been in command when the vessel was captured by the enemy, was a huge Yankee from New Bedford, a violent-tempered old fellow, and he was furious at being superseded by a nutshell of a boy, as he contemptuously called young David. For such an old sea dog to be placed under the orders of a 12-year-old boy seemed galling enough to his pride, and he secretly determined to put the young whippersnapper in his proper place the very moment the other ships had departed. Accordingly, when the Essex Junior and the convoy made off to southward, and Captain Porter had disappeared to the northward, the captain of the Barclay still kept his vessel contemptuously at anchor, making no preparations to follow, and flaunting his intention of remaining where he was exactly so long as it pleased him. Little Midshipman Farragut saw that his hour of trial had come. He must play the man now, and assume the command entrusted to him, order the ship under way, and see her off on her journey, or else acknowledge himself too little to fulfill the responsibility Captain Porter had laid upon him, yield up his command, and let the captain have his own way ever after. Though he secretly shook in his boots like every one else in the presence of the grizzly old fellow, he nevertheless went straight to him, and ordered quietly, "Have the main topsail filled away, and close up at once with the convoy." At this the captain burst forth in a fury. He would go where he pleased and when he pleased. He would steer for New Zealand or the moon if he liked, and he cried out to the sailors standing about, "Let no man dare touch a rope without my orders. I'll shoot if you do. I've no mind to trust myself with a damned little nutshell. I'll go my own course and shoot the dog who takes orders from any but me." Unfortunately, however, he did not have his pistols with him to carry out this magnificent threat, so he plunged down the companionway after them. The men stood about irresolute. It was a moment for great decision. Little Farragut turned to his right hand man of the crew. "Have the main topsail filled away," he repeated with still more positive emphasis. His pluck turned the tide with the men. "Aye, aye, sir," came the sailor's cheerful response, and from that time on young David was undisputed master of the vessel. He at once set vigorously about giving all necessary orders to make sail, and calmly notified the captain below not to come on deck with his pistols unless he wished to go overboard. The captain, perceiving that the crew remained faithful to the little officer detailed them, and that David would in truth have no difficulty whatever in having him pitched over into the sea, decided in the interest of his own continued health and well being to draw in his horns and obey. Thus on the long journey back to Chile David was in command, and he carried out that great responsibility with a skill, good judgment, and self-reliance, and yet with a freedom from all conceit or unnecessary self-assertion which was remarkable in a lad of 12. The little nutshell was assuredly given plenty of opportunity to prove his mettle aboard the Essex, for when, after faithfully performing his mission, he once more returned on the Essex Junior to join the vessel at the Galapagos Islands, it was with news that the British government had been so aroused by tales of the destruction the Essex had wrought to her commerce and fisheries in the Pacific, that she was sending out the frigate Phoebe and 2 sloops to capture her. On hearing this, Captain Porter at once sailed westward to the Marquesas Islands, where he could overhaul the Essex without danger from British men of war, and make ready for the coming struggle with a greatly superior force. Here the Essex and Essex Junior lay for 6 months. The crews were daily drilled in the use of the guns, cutlasses, and muskets, and trained with that perfect discipline for which Captain Porter was famous. During this time David and the other midshipmen, when not at their studies or drill, were allowed ashore, where they gathered bananas, yams, breadfruit, and cocoanuts, and made friends with the sturdy brown native boys, who taught them to throw the spear, walk on stilts, and especially to perform many wonderful feats in swimming. At last, all preparations being made, the Essex and Essex Junior returned to Valparaiso harbor, arriving on the 23rd of February, 1814. 5 days later the frigate Phoebe and the sloop Cherub appeared in the bay. Half the crew of the Essex were ashore at the time on leave, and Captain Hillyar of the Phoebe, being informed of this, at once determined to seize her while she must fall an easy prey, in spite of the fact that Valparaiso harbor was neutral water, where no hostile engagements could lawfully occur. But Captain Porter had been on the lookout. A signal gun brought every one of his men in 15 minutes back to his station. When the Phoebe came dashing up within 15 feet of the Essex, Captain Hillyar, instead of finding a vessel at his mercy, to his intense surprise found every American at his gun, with matches burning and cutlasses drawn, in such a formidable state of defense that he speedily backed away, and tried to pass off this hostile approach with some clumsy compliments to Captain Porter. Captain Porter replied to his compliments with a politeness so grim that the Phoebe was more than ever anxious to get out of his reach, and in her haste to accomplish this she placed herself in such a position that Captain Porter could easily have raked her fore and aft with his guns and done for her once for all. But his principles of honor forbade him to violate the neutrality of the harbor, so he let the Phoebe go free, though he later discovered to his immense cost that Captain Hillyar was not a man to return such an act of courtesy. The English ships, after provisioning, went outside the harbor and maintained a blockade of the two American vessels. Week after week they cruised up and down just outside the bay, so that the Americans could not possibly slip through. On March 28th a heavy gale swept into the harbor, and Porter decided to take advantage of the weather to run the blockade. At first it looked as though he would succeed, but on her way the Essex was struck by a violent squall that carried away her main topsail. Escape in such a disabled state was impossible, so Porter tried to regain his safe position in the harbor, but the Essex was only able to struggle as far back as a small bay about a quarter of a mile offshore. She was, however, still within neutral waters, and had every reason to expect that Hillyer would respect that neutrality, remembering how Porter had refused to fire on him when he had the Phoebe so entirely at his mercy. But Porter soon saw his mistake. As soon as the British discerned the plight of the Essex, the two vessels both bore down together on the crippled frigate, now separated from her companion, and opened their broadsides on her. Then began one of the most nobly contested defenses in history, the odds being from the beginning 3-1 against the Essex. Through the frightful scenes that followed, Midshipman Farragut bore himself like a man, now carrying messages for Captain Porter, now helping with a gun, now fetching powder, now supporting a wounded man down below. Once he was knocked down a hatch by the explosion of a cannon ball. Again a shot tore away one of his coat tails, but still the little midshipman remained at his post in the midst of the fray. At length fire broke out on the ship and was nearing the powder magazine. Men came running up from below with their clothing on fire. Captain Porter ordered them to jump overboard and swim for their lives. Then, finding that the ship was in a sinking condition, he surrendered in order to save the wounded. On the following day David Farragut went aboard the Phoebe, a prisoner, and was sent into the steerage with the British middies. He was almost in tears over the capture of the Essex, but was roused from his grief by the sight of an English midshipman calmly appropriating his, David's, beloved pet pig, Murphy. "That's my pig!" shrieked David, seizing Murphy by the ear. "Fight for it, then!" jeered the others. Without more ado, David stripped off his jacket and pitched into the young Englishman in short order, with such excellent results that in a few moments he had most soundly and satisfactorily trounced him. Thereafter he took Master Murphy under his arm and walked off, feeling that he had thus in some degree wiped out the disgrace of the American defeat. Soon after this David was sent back to America with the other officers on parole, and thus ended his connection with the famous frigate Essex, whereon he got the training that years later in the war for the preservation of the American Union made possible the splendid victories of New Orleans and Mobile Bay, victories won against almost impossible odds by the man that grew out of that selfsame boy, who was Midshipman David Farragut. End of section 43. Young Midshipman David Farragut. Recording by Tom Merritt.